On April 17th, 2013, in Tupelo, Mississippi, a 46-year-old Elvis impersonator named Paul Kevin Curtis had just gotten in his car ready to head out with his dog Moo Cow on his lap when he noticed a commotion on his street. His neighbors, who were typically quiet homebodies, were pacing out on their lawns. As he slowed down to check his mailbox, he heard the sudden, loud sound of screeching tires. Then, nearly 24 SUVs came tearing down the street, all closing in on Curtis's home. In an instant, he was surrounded by agents from the FBI, Homeland Security, members of the Secret Service, local police, and Capitol Police. They had their guns trained on him and ordered him to step out of the vehicle and drop his dog. Moo Cow, frightened, darted off down the street, but a runaway dog was the least of Curtis's problems. Loaded into the back of a van and surrounded by armed guards, Curtis was rushed to the Lafayette County Jail in Oxford, more than 90 miles away. He had no idea why he was under arrest, but no one would answer his questions. How did a man who spent most of his time dressed up as Elvis find himself here? After a 3-hour interrogation, investigators told Curtis that a young girl had been hospitalized due to his actions. They asked him if he knew what ricin was, but when he responded that he had never heard of it before in his life, they called him a liar. Several more hours of questioning followed before investigators began to wonder if they'd grabbed the wrong man. And soon, their man learned why he'd been grabbed in the first place. Paul Kevin Curtis was accused of sending ricin-laced letters to President Barack Obama, U.S. Senator Roger Wicker, and local Mississippi Judge Sadie Holland. These letters were signed with the phrase, "I am KC, and I approve this message," a signature Curtis had previously used in posts he made online. But what if Curtis was telling the truth, and he hadn't actually sent the letters? The question weighed on investigators until they finally asked Curtis if he had any enemies or knew anyone who would want to harm him. He answered immediately, yeah, Everett Dutschke. Dutschke had once been the owner of an independent newspaper that promised to print any story, and Curtis initially met him to try and pitch him on a story about an alleged illegal scheme at a local hospital. Curtis was convinced the hospital was selling patients' organs on the black market. He felt that if he could just get the story out there, he'd blow the whole operation wide open. And Dutschke was going to be the man to help him do it. Unfortunately for Curtis, Dutschke was also trying to get into local politics and no longer wanted to publish controversial stories. Their meeting ended with the two men wary of each other and marked the beginning of a 7-year feud. A feud that culminated in Dutschke attempting to frame Curtis for sending the ricin-laced letters. And the details of the story are even more bizarre than you might imagine. You're listening to History Uncovered, where we explore the uncharted corners of the natural world and the world past. I'm All It's Interesting staff writer Austin Harvey.
And I'm All It's Interesting staff writer Kalina Fraga.
And today we'll be sharing the strange story of Paul Kevin Curtis and Everett Dutschke. Like I said to you just a minute ago, this one's very weird, especially coming off our last 2 episodes, which were missing persons cases.
Right.
This one is a crime story, but not in the traditional sense. It's really more of a rivalry story between 2 guys from a small town in Mississippi. And for anyone listening, this is, I think, coming out, let me see, either the day before the Netflix documentary series, The Kings of Tupelo, comes out, which would be sharing the same story here.
Okay, interesting.
So if you're listening to this the day it comes out, tomorrow you'll be able to listen or be able to watch the Netflix series about this, which will also feature interviews with at least Kevin Curtis. So check that out as well while you're there. But let's just to start things off. We'll start with there's 2 main figures in this story. There's Kevin Curtis and there's Everett Dutschke. There's some debate over how that guy's name is pronounced. It's spelled like Dutschke.
Yeah.
There's a quote from one of the sheriffs in the town who was like, "We just called him douchebag." So just to give a little preview of that guy. They're both 2 very eccentric figures here. But we'll start with Paul Kevin Curtis. He just goes by Kevin Curtis. He drops the Paul from his name. The incident in question here started in 2013. At the time, the best way you could describe Kevin Curtis was a former janitor who was receiving disability payments for bipolar disorder. a fairly decent Elvis impersonator,
Hmm.
an aspiring author, and a conspiracy theorist.
Oh, wow. Lots of different things.
So he's got a lot going on here. As a kid, he was considered like kind of a prodigy of an Elvis impersonator. His mother, her name was Lois. She would drive him to Memphis to have an actual like mock Elvis suit made for him.
Wow.
By Elvis's official suit maker.
He's really serious, a very serious Elvis
They were
impersonator.
very serious about this. Yeah, he had a belt made by Elvis's belt maker. His mom apparently kind of knew Elvis somehow.
Was he born in Tupelo?
He was definitely from Mississippi, right? No, he was from Tupelo.
Huh,
Yeah.
well.
So there you go. Kevin Curtis's mom knew Elvis, at least tangentially. But when Elvis was older, she would speak to him on the phone often.
Wow.
And they would pray together.
Huh.
So
that's strange.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So I guess she was a, kind of friend, big fan of Elvis and was like, hey, my kid's going to impersonate him. But, as he got into his teenage years, Kevin kind of got into a little bit of trouble. He married a woman. And this is such an interesting quote. This is from him directly. He said he married a woman after a motorcycle, quote unquote, ripped off her face.
Oh.
Which I think he was like driving the motorcycle and something happened that like she got damaged in it.
And that's why he married her? Like, was he implying out of guilt then? Or
I think they were dating. I think it was like a girlfriend.
Huh.
But it was pretty unclear. A lot of this information comes like from a very extensive GQ article about him.
Okay.
And the author of that GQ article was like, I'm just going to kind of skip over most of the childhood stuff, but throw in a few key details to get the idea.
Well, that does paint a picture.
For sure.
Yeah.
Their marriage did not last. They divorced. And then Kevin moved to Chicago, where he was living out of his car and getting by eating food out of garbage cans.
A freegatarian. That's what those are called.
Yeah. Is that what that is? A freegatarian?
Yeah, there was a guy in my
funny.
college who was really into that.
Oh.
Yep. He was a weird guy.
Not out of necessity, just because he was
No,
hey,
he
free?
was from a very well-off family, but...
That's really interesting.
Mm-hmm. Anyway, so this guy was also living that life.
A freegatarian for a little bit. I don't think quite as intentionally, but...
Right.
But by the time he got to his late 20s, things had kind of turned around for him. He'd returned to Tupelo. He married a woman named Laura. They had, I think, 4 children together. The number was kind of unclear, but several children. He also started his own business. It was called The Cleaning Crew. It was a janitorial company, and he had 2 employees working for him. And according to him, he was making $80 to $100 a day without getting out of bed. So he wasn't really hands-on in the actual cleaning part, at least initially. What he did instead, more actively with his time, was also taking more gigs as an Elvis impersonator. And he had a younger brother named Jack, and they would appear on this like local morning show every now and then as Double Trouble, which was billed as young Elvis and Vegas Elvis on stage at the same time.
So strange.
Very, very strange. But hey, if you have a passion and you're pursuing it and you've got the means to do it, by all means.
Yeah, does seem like this was his talent in life.
Yeah, by all means. But I guess things started to change again for him towards the end of the 90s. In 1998, he took a contract buffing floors at the North Mississippi Medical Center. And from what I understand, he actually went in and did the work there. So this wasn't like he sent his employees in.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if he must have not actually been making $80 to $100 a day doing nothing, because
it seems unrealistic.
I don't know what the actual situation was there. All I know is that he, in 1998, took a job working for this hospital. And then he was mostly working in the ER, just kind of cleaning the floors there. But on December 17th, 1999, he gets a call basically saying, like, there's this big spill in the morgue. We need you to go down and take care of that, which is already like not a good sign. Big spill in the morgue.
Yeah, right. Ominous.
So big spill indeed it was, because he was there for 3 hours cleaning it up. Or so he says, at least. He says he was there for 3 hours, at which point he got very thirsty and wanted to grab a Dr. Pepper out of the fridge.
Uh-huh.
So he opens what he thinks is like a regular fridge in the morgue,
Uh-huh.
which I already have questions about what you were expecting to find in there.
Right.
Not this, apparently. He says he found the chopped up remains and severed head of a man that he had seen just days earlier alive in the emergency room. Then he says the next day he was called into the CEO's office and presented with documents that he was asked to sign. The documents basically were a declaration of not trespassing, but entering an unauthorized area of the hospital.
Which sounds like maybe he did do, but okay.
Yeah, there's an argument to be made that opening the fridge was a step too far, but he was allegedly called down to the morgue to clean up. So that is a little bit of a gray area. So basically what he took this as is, I've been called down to the morgue and I saw something I wasn't supposed to see. And now they're trying to get me to resign without pay and say that I was in an unauthorized area of the hospital.
Sketch.
He took this as a sign that the hospital was trying to cover something up, that he had stumbled upon some sort of conspiracy bigger than him and that they were trying to silence him. And over time, he became convinced that this hospital was selling human organs on the black market.
Wow.
And he would go to any lengths to prove that to be true.
Quite an accusation there.
Quite an accusation. There's an implication there that he thinks they're also intentionally killing people that are in the ER.
Well, if he saw someone alive a couple days earlier and then finds him dead and chopped up, that's, yeah.
Right. So this became like a full-on obsession for him at this point. He was obviously let go from his job, whether it was for going into an unauthorized area, whether it was because they were trying to silence him, whether it was because he clearly had detached from reality to some degree and they just decided, let's not have him around. But over the next couple years, he would find himself in trouble for petty crimes like cyber stalking, public intoxication, and assault. At the same time, his personal life was falling apart because he was just completely obsessed with this conspiracy theory that he was so convinced of. And it like took precedent over his personal relationships with his family and his friends. And then a series of unfortunate events happened. His car exploded. Their house burned down. And in the fire, their pet dog, rabbit, and cat all died.
Oh.
He, of course, was convinced that this was malefactors, people employed by the hospital, possibly black market dealers sabotaging him, that they had intentionally blown his car up, that they'd set fire to his house. His wife, when she was asked about it, was basically like, no, these things were our own fault.
Oh, okay.
She was like, we left the burner on or something like that. I forget her exact explanation, but she was not as convinced that this was a conspiracy. She was like, no, I think maybe we just didn't replace something in the car that needed to be replaced, or we should have had repairs done on our house, and this fire was caused by something we did.
I see.
After enough time had gone by, Laura and their children moved out. She was like, they separated. She's like, I can't do this anymore with you just constantly believing that people are targeting us. I think we've seen in recent years as well, when people start to fall down conspiratorial rabbit holes and they are then abandoned by the people in their real life, rather than reassessing most of the time and saying like, ooh, maybe I take a step back and self-evaluate. Like QAnon people, right? Instead of being like, yeah, maybe it's time to log off and like get back in touch with people in my real life. Most of the time people tend to like in their isolation double down on this online rabbit hole conspiracy stuff, which is exactly what happened with Kevin Curtis. He was at first posting a lot on his MySpace page.
What year was this? You said 99?
99 was when he discovered it. This would have been like, we're getting into like 2004, 2005.
Okay, yeah, MySpace era.
Yeah. There's kind of that early 2000s era in general. But he was posting a lot on MySpace. He would post his theories and his thoughts. Most of the time, he would sign off with this very particular catchphrase. He would write, I am KC, and I approve this message. And that's an important detail to remember for later. Around that same time, he heard about this local independent newspaper that was owned by a guy named Everett Dutschke. There's literally no record of this newspaper existing, according to GQ.
Mm-hmm.
And they had more time to research this than I did. So they didn't find any evidence, at least online, about this newspaper ever existing. But according to Kevin Curtis, the front page of the newspaper, or maybe like the landing site of the website of it, said, "I will print any story in Northeast Mississippi, no matter how big or small or controversial. And if the Daily Journal will not tell it, I will."
Dangerous.
Very dangerous. But very opportunistic for Kevin Curtis.
Yeah.
Because he's like, oh, I've finally found somebody who would share the details of my investigation. Like, we'll blow this whole black market organ scheme wide open. So he reached out. He wrote a letter or an email to Dutschke. I think he might have even called him and was like, "Hi, my name's Kevin Curtis. I have this story. I'd love to share it. Your newspaper says you'll publish any story." He never hears back. Weirdly enough, Everett Dutschke also was working at the same insurance agency as Laura, his ex-wife.
Oh, weird.
And they were still in contact because they had children together.
Yeah.
So he finds out that this guy works with his wife, and he hears about an upcoming luncheon that the insurance firm is holding. And he decides, I'm going to crash it and get this guy to publish my story.
Interesting. So by day, he works at an insurance agency, and by night, he allegedly has this newspaper that no one can find.
Yeah.
Okay. Got it.
Now's a good time to go talk about Everett Dutschke, because he's just as strange.
I'm not surprised.
Maybe stranger, honestly. He was born in Louisville, then raised in Texas, and then he moved to Tupelo for reasons that were unclear.
I think it's Tupelo.
Is it Tupelo?
There's just one song that I know that they say Tupelo, but
I'll go Tupelo.
Right.
Tupelo works. But people don't know why he came here. It's not really it's not like you don't need an excuse to move somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
But also when you move somewhere like Tupelo without your job kind of sending you there.
People usually have a reason. It's like family or work.
Right. You're not just like, I just wound up here.
Yeah.
But that's kind of what happened with him. And they had a variety of words to describe him. Some people called him a mystery man. Some people called him a flirt. Other people called him a psycho. Some people called him a pervert.
Oh, these words escalate. First, they're kind of fine. And then it's
Right. At first, there's almost a little bit of a charm to it. It's
mystery
man. That's fun. Oh, he's a little flirty.
Independent journalist. And it's
perverted psychopath. So, Dutschke was very into martial arts. He had a long history of working in martial arts studios, but not necessarily a good resume. One studio that he worked for fired him on suspicion of stealing, and another one that he worked at fired him for an alleged affair with one student's mother. He also said that he worked as a broadcaster in the past, and he was a member of Mensa, which is like a high IQ social club.
Yeah.
I had never heard of it before. I don't know what that says about my IQ.
We have some articles about very high IQ people who belong to Mensa.
Mensa, interesting.
Yeah.
He was very proud of it. He was very, very proud of it. Back in Tupelo, though, he became good friends with Laura Curtis when they worked together at the firm. They admitted that they had been kind of flirty with each other. This is when she was still married. They said they never had an affair. When asked why, she said that he was too short and hairy.
Oh. Okay, I guess that's a reason.
Yeah, I mean, it's shallow, but it's a good reason to not have an affair, I suppose. So he's still, his past a little bit of a mystery, but we'll fast forward to this meeting between the two men now. This was 2006. Curtis did crash the luncheon, introduced himself again, and then basically said, will you publish my story? At the time, though, Dutschke was wanting to run for state legislature. And so he was concerned that if he published a negative, controversial story about a local hospital, that would hurt his chances.
He probably shouldn't advertise that he wants to publish anything that the mainstream media won't publish if that's his opinion. But all right.
Right. Oh, again, I don't even know if he ever published this paper.
Yeah.
Or if it was just like an idea he had. He's like, oh, maybe I'll do that. Like he seems like he kind of had his hands in a lot of different pockets. Like he was trying just to sow seeds wherever he could. He's like, oh, maybe I'll get into publishing. Maybe I'll get into local politics.
Yeah.
Work at this insurance firm. Open up a dojo. So I again, there's no evidence that it ever actually even existed, but it did lead to a very weird confrontation between these two guys at this luncheon. So when Dutschke basically told Curtis, no, I will not publish that story, Curtis very angrily called him a liar and stormed off. And Dutschke says that he turned to Laura and said to her, I never want to see that guy again, which is, I think, a fair
I think
thing
that's
to
fair
say
too.
at
Yeah.
this point. Dutschke did run for the state house against the Democratic incumbent Steve Holland, and his campaign at the time seemed very weird. Perhaps in the modern context of politics, not that weird at all. It was full of just like personal attacks. He seemed to just like have like a personal hatred for Steve Holland. Holland in an interview said that Dutschke called him everything from gay to communist, but at the time it did not work. Dutschke's strategy. He ended up losing the race 27-68 against Holland.
Kind of a rout.
Yeah. So, yeah, it was literally like I looked more into it. It was just a campaign on bullying this guy and not offering like any real solutions. It was super weird, especially for a guy who was like not from this town originally.
Right.
And people kind of were wary about him. It was a super weird campaign.
And it's what, 2006? So
2006, 2007.
yeah, it's kind of I mean, I guess there's always been bullying in politics, but not to the extent that there is perhaps today.
Yeah. We're about a decade ahead of that period. Here, the story gets a little muddled because both Curtis and Dutschke claim that the other one was stalking them online. Dutschke said that Curtis would, this is so crazy, he would create Facebook accounts and just re-upload posts and photos that Dutschke and his wife made.
That's
So like
creepy.
videos of their children and their pets and things like that. Curtis said that Dutschke was stalking him, though, and claimed that he had some sort of tracking software on his computer that let him see how often certain people were refreshing his MySpace page.
Oh, that's not a thing.
And he said that Dutschke was refreshing that page like 70 times a day.
Oh, my God.
Keep in mind, these guys have only met once.
Yeah.
Like in person. They met one time. They're like bitter enemies.
It's so strange. It sounds like they're both people who react strongly to things in their lives.
Curtis did put his theory to the test, though. And he created a fake Mensa certificate for himself and put it up on his MySpace page and said that hours later, he got an email from Dutschke basically saying like, that certificate is fraudulent. He was like, it was like some legal threats in there. He's like, I'll sue you.
Wow.
You're not allowed to do that. Take the photo down.
Yeah, it does kind of prove his theory. He's like keeping an eye on Curtis's page.
It's maybe not 70 times a day, but he's keeping up with it at the very least. Eventually it gets to a point where Dutschke now owns like a local martial arts studio and says to Curtis, come down to my studio. Let's settle this like men.
Oh my God.
And then Curtis says he went and Dutschke didn't show up. And Dutschke says that Curtis never showed up.
Wow. It sounds like no one showed up.
Sounds like no one showed up.
Wow.
And then for the next like 6-7 years, they just kept trying to constantly ruin each other's lives. And when people would ask him, like, why do you hate this guy so much? They'd be like, I don't know. They could not properly articulate why they hated each other so much.
Wow.
Dutschke, at this point, also, now that he's been around town a little bit longer, is starting to establish a really negative reputation for himself. Not just because of his weird campaign against Steve Holland. He also he formed this musical act called Dusty and the Robo-Drum, which, according to the back of the CD that he put out as this music act, it was progressive guitar funktronica for smart people.
Uh,
A local bar owner described the musical act as Dutschke's first act of terrorism.
oh my God. Wow. Jeez.
So, from what the testimony of the bar owner was that Dutschke would show up, whatever night of the week he booked, and every time he would start playing the music, the entire room would go outside for a cigarette and only come back in when the music stopped.
Not smart enough, I guess.
Yeah, I guess
Not
they
smart
couldn't appreciate
people.
it. They're not Mensa members.
Right.
They couldn't appreciate it.
Wow.
He also got into a bit of a legal scandal in 2012. He had been accused of essentially exposing himself to groups of young girls who would walk by his house.
Okay.
He would blast electronic music and have, like green laser pointer, like club lights going.
Yeah.
So they'd be like shining around, and he would leave the windows open and then just dance in the nude.
That's interesting. It's
people
not like
walked
he's
by.
not quite like exposing himself like on the street, which
Right.
would be worse. But
Right.
it's pretty odd behavior. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think his counter argument was like, why are people looking in my window?
For
Which is like,
flashing lasers, it might catch someone's
sure,
eye.
Yeah. It's like fair point. You are in your own home. The window is wide open and you are kind of causing a disturbance.
Right.
He was also accused of groping 3 girls who were under the age of 16 at his martial arts studio.
See, that's worse.
And that's worse. So it kind of defeats the, I'm just alone in my house defense a little bit. But as these accusations were coming forward, no one was happier about it than Kevin Curtis.
I can imagine.
He was like, finally, this is my
Sweet
chance.
Revenge.
So he would just constantly post online, like resharing local newspaper articles about Dutschke's accusations. He would send emails to the prosecutors on the cases being like, what can you tell me? Are there any updates? He'd comment on like Dutschke's YouTube channels, like see you in prison, things like just like really just really over the top. But it also lit a fire under Dutschke and likely caused him to then retaliate in a very extreme way, which is the entire point of why we're even talking about this. In April 2013, Tupelo Judge Sadie Holland, who was Steve Holland's mother, was informed by her staff that a suspicious letter had arrived for her. Inside the letter, there was a coarse-grained powder, and the letter was signed off, I am KC, and I approve this message. She didn't have much of a reaction to this. She thought it was just kind of like a joke. She knew Kevin Curtis because he had been in legal trouble before. She didn't think he was the kind of guy to like do this, to like try and kill her or anything like that.
Wow.
I think at the time she just made a joke like, oh, it must be some couple that I married sending me sand from the beach they're on for their honeymoon. So she didn't really care. There were 2 other letters that were sent to higher status politicians that were not treated with the same amount of levity. The first of those 2 letters was sent to Mississippi Senator Roger Wicker, and the second one was sent to President Barack Obama.
That will get some attention, I would think.
That will get some attention.
Yeah.
So on April 17th, as Kevin Curtis was getting ready to go visit his ex-wife, he gets in his car. He takes his little dog, whose name is Moo Cow.
Oh, it's a good name for a dog.
And Moo Cow is riding on his lap, and he backs out of his driveway and he stops to get mail from his mailbox.
Mm-hmm.
And he's looking around the street and he's noticing that like everyone's kind of out on their lawns, which is very strange.
Mm-hmm.
And they're all kind of like antsy and looking around. And then suddenly more than 24 SUVs came tearing down the street and surrounded his car. Police informed him to get out of the car. He was like, hold on, my dog's in there. They were like, drop the dog, get out of the car and put your hands up.
Oh, gosh.
And he puts the dog down and a cop goes over to try and like get the dog away and it freaks out and takes off. So he's freaking out now that he's like, I don't know what's going on. My dog just ran away.
Yeah.
Are you guys going to make sure I get my dog back? And they're like, that is not the biggest concern you should be having right now.
Right.
Sir. They put him in the back of a van. They drive him 90 miles away to prison and start interrogating him. He has no clue what's going on. Meanwhile, like as he's being held in police custody, the local press is going crazy, running stories about this. Kevin Curtis accused of sending ricin-laced letters to government officials. A bunch of neighbors and people who knew him, they quoted the neighbors and they said he was insane. They said that he had a lengthy history of mental illness. And like 3 hours into the investigation, police are like, there's a little girl in the hospital because of what you did. And he's like, I do not know what you're talking about. And then they kind of just gave up we're not going to get this out of him, so let's just be straight up with him. They're like, do you know what anthrax is? He's like, what? They're like, do you know what ricin is? And he's like, I know what rice is. I don't know. I've never heard of ricin in my life. And they were like, okay. And they interrogated him for another 4 hours. And at that point, they were like, what if, shot in the dark here, what if he's telling the truth? What if he actually does not know what ricin is? And so they were like, okay, we'll take you at your word here. Is there anyone you know who would consider you an enemy or wish to cause you harm? And he immediately goes, yeah, Everett Dutschke.
Yeah. Oh, God.
They, of course, searched Kevin Curtis's house. They found no evidence of like him having written these letters, no search history or anything that would suggest that he had looked up how to make ricin or any kind of poison. The same could not be said for Everett Dutschke.
Oh, no.
An unnamed witness claimed that they once heard Dutschke talking about knowing how to make poison and, quote, get people out of office. An FBI surveillance team watched him, and they said they saw him run from his dojo to a dumpster down the street to retrieve the box for a Black & Decker Smart Grind coffee grinder, a box containing latex gloves, and a dust mask.
Sketch.
And the real kicker is then they searched his laptop and they found a document titled Standard Operating Procedure for Ricin.
Oh.
As well as eBay and PayPal records showing that he had purchased castor bean seeds, which are used to make ricin.
Wow.
And though he initially pleaded not guilty, he ended up pleading guilty in the end and was sentenced to 25 years in prison.
I bet Kevin Curtis was pretty pleased by how that all turned out then.
Yeah, I'm very interested to see the Netflix series now because it's 10 years removed or whatever.
Yeah.
The GQ article was kind of written in the midst of all this going on while Dutschke was still proclaiming innocence. And then any of the follow-up articles were more just like local news. This kind of got overshadowed by the Boston bombing by the end of it, the Boston Marathon bombing. So the national news media kind of dropped this story after a certain point. They were focused elsewhere, understandably. So all the local stories were kind of just like, yeah, Dutschke sentenced to 25 years. They never really followed up with Kevin Curtis or anything. So I know that the Netflix docuseries, they sat down and interviewed him.
Curtis, but
directly.
Not Dutschke.
I don't know if they talked to Dutschke. He wasn't in the trailer. But there were local law enforcement and Kevin Curtis was like prominently featured. He's still very angry about a lot of this.
Yeah, I can imagine. It kind of feels like out of the two of them, Dutschke did a lot. I mean, obviously he did worse things with trying to frame Kevin Curtis, but just in general did worse things. Like all Kevin Curtis really did was
make some online posts.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Make some very creepy online posts, but Dutschke, like, he did all sorts of things, all sorts of weird stuff.
Yeah, that's kind of how I viewed it too. It's like the worst thing Kevin Curtis did was kind of become an online troll and conspiracy theorist.
Right.
But not to the dangerous degree of someone like Alex Jones, where he like actually convinced people of this and then was like sued for defamation or anything like that. It was more just kind of like post into the void that people were like, okay, that's a little weird. And then he would dress up as Elvis.
Yeah, it seems kind of harmless.
Dutschke is definitely a little bit more like slimy.
Yeah, all the allegations of like groping girls and dancing naked and.
But it is very interesting. This bitter rivalry formed between these two guys who really had no business interacting with each other outside of one instance.
That's the crazy thing is it only took that one interaction for them to just develop this deep hatred towards each other.
Yeah. And Dutschke was like when Kevin Curtis was making all these posts online about him and like taunting him and sharing all the accusations that were levied, he basically was just like, yeah, obviously I'm going to stand up for myself and my family. And it's like, okay, but your decision, the way you chose to do that was by trying to poison the president of the United States.
Right, yeah.
Which is not
God.
really standing up for your family very much.
It kind of makes me wonder if something like did happen with Dutschke and Kevin's
and the wife.
Yeah. Because that would kind of explain this like deep animosity they have for each other more than just this one interaction that didn't go the way Kevin Curtis wanted it to go.
Right. And it's also just a really gross overreaction on Dutschke's part. Like an insane overreaction.
Right.
But also like, again, he had that weird hatred for Steve Holland also. And then one of the people who received the letters was Steve Holland's mom.
Yeah.
So there seems to be like a little bit of a personal grudge that he held against like everybody.
Did he like hate Obama and this other senator as well?
I'm assuming he must have. Steve Holland was a Democrat. Let me see if this Mississippi senator was also a Democrat. No, he was a Republican. So it doesn't seem to be like politically motivated in that sense.
He just kind of hates everybody.
Yeah.
Wow.
Just kind of like, just holds these weird grudges for like no real reason. And again, like just very, very proud of his Mensa certificate. He took that very personally as well when Kevin Curtis put that fake certificate up.
Curtis knew how to push his buttons.
Yeah.
Oh, that is a really odd story.
It's very strange. It's very, very strange. There's no like real resolution to it yet, I guess, because we're still waiting on a lot of that story to come out with this documentary.
Yeah, I wonder what new insights they might have found.
Yeah. At the time, Kevin Curtis was like, he was more convinced than ever by the time this ended that he was right about the hospital thing.
Well, I was going to say, it's sort of, if we're playing like 3D chess, kind of, it's like, if there was a conspiracy against him, that this could be like part of trying to like take him down for good.
And that's exactly what he thought. He's like, they tried to blow my car up. They tried to burn my house down. And now they're trying to frame me for assassination attempts
of the president. And
he's like,
the dog
they're trying to silence me.
Yeah, right. I understand why he might.
So it just reaffirmed his,
Yeah.
But like the reality of it is more like, no, you just kind of had two very eccentric, prideful guys squaring up against each other.
I don't know how I feel about Netflix giving someone a platform, but someone like him a platform, but I guess.
Yeah. Well, it's been 10 years, so maybe he's like
mellowed out
a bit. But he did suffer from bipolar disorder.
Right.
So maybe he's medicated and has seen a therapist, or maybe he's the same as always. I guess we'll see.
Wow. It's so wild because I kind of remember this story when it first came out, but just like the scant details. At the time, I think it was just like Elvis impersonator tries to kill the president.
Right.
And that
I
was
remember
the headline.
hearing that as well. And I was like, that's weird. Okay.
Yeah. And then all this other stuff happened and it wasn't really the impersonator and da-da-da-da. But like you said, I guess it got overshadowed by other bigger news stories.
Kind of more serious stories.
Yeah.
Yeah. But the Tudum article about this, which is like Netflix's news site, says the Kings of Tupelo is a Southern fever dream. And I think that is a very good description of this situation.
It does seem like a fever dream. So odd.
Every step of the way, it gets weirder. It's like, okay, you've got the Elvis impersonation thing. I guess that's not that weird, but then that guy becomes the anti-hospital conspiracy theorist.
Yeah.
And then you have this guy who runs a newspaper and is also an insurance worker and wants to run for local office, but also really likes super obscure, pretentious funktronica that no one else likes.
Right.
And he's really into martial arts. And Kevin Curtis was also into martial arts because Elvis was into martial arts.
Oh, wow. I'm surprised they didn't fight each other then.
Yeah, he wasn't like, I don't think like super involved in the dojo, but I saw photographs of him in like a karate gi. So
Huh.
he's definitely like got some sort of interest in it.
So strange. The whole thing like faintly feels like a Southern Gothic in a way. Just this like deep hatred they have. Like something like that feels like a very like kind of classic trope of like a certain kind of literature. But
it's almost Shakespearean.
Yeah, right.
It's like borderline Shakespearean, and it's
for the modern day.
Yeah. But just these petty grudges that just blew up into this giant thing.
Well, the role that internet plays in that is kind of interesting too. It's like this is where that was their battlefield, basically.
Right.
For a while.
Like you pointed out, like he was posting these initial thoughts, peak MySpace era, but then it evolved into like making fake Facebook posts about, or making Facebook accounts where he was like resharing these posts and things. So
yeah, I feel like MySpace. I mean, I feel like it was a little less harmful. It was just kind of really simple, and you were just with your friends. And Facebook was you had a wider reach if you wanted it, and I don't know, more people were on it.
But yeah, that's the very strange. It's a doozy. I feel like it's a good one to go out on for the end of the year.
Yeah.
As our last podcast of the year.
I think so.
Something a little bit more lighthearted.
Lighthearted, but a lot to kind of chew on as well. So lots of details here. Yeah. And it might be interesting to watch the Netflix thing after this as well.
Right. Yeah. When we come back in January, we're talking about the Satanic Panic, right?
That's right. I just finished that one. Yes.
Yeah. But if we do, I think I'm going to watch this. You don't have to watch it if you don't want to.
I probably won't watch it, but
I'll probably watch it and just give a quick little follow-up next time too, and just be like, oh, there we go.
Cool. Yeah. Any new details or anything would be interesting.
Yeah. I'm very curious. If anyone here is listening and you're from Tupelo, Mississippi, sorry, I mispronounced it for the first half of the episode. Firstly. Secondly, let me know if you've met either of these men or are familiar with this story.
That'd be a scoop.
It'd be very cool. I would love to hear from somebody who knew them or was like in the town when this was happening.
Yeah, we love to hear from everybody. And if you do know something about the story or have thoughts about it or watch the documentary or whatever, you can reach out to us and share those thoughts. You can email us at podcast@allit'sinteresting.com, or you can leave a voicemail at 929-526-3029.
Yeah, and there is a post going live on allthisinteresting.com that I wrote about this as well, which goes into a little bit more detail, has some quotes and things like that from different people involved. So if you want to get a little more information there, that'll be up on allthisinteresting.com alongside the countless of dozens of hundreds of articles that we publish every single month. So be sure to check that out. Become a member there if you want extra podcast content and a few bonus perks on the website by going to allthat'sinteresting.com/membership. And you can sign up for our newsletter so that you never miss a story at allthat'sinteresting.com/sign-up.
Yes. And we're also on social media, but I don't know any of the social media handles, to be honest. I should write those down,
if you want to
see,
some short... Nah, it's all right. I have not written down the phone number, so we each have our things. If you want to follow us on social media, we're on Instagram at History Uncovered Podcast, on TikTok at Real History Uncovered. Maybe not for much longer.
That's right.
As of this morning, there was news that TikTok ban is still going to go through unless they sell to an American company. So we'll see about that one. But we will definitely be on Instagram and YouTube still as well. So be sure to follow us there and give this podcast a nice 4 or 5 star rating. 5 stars.
Go for 5 stars.
5 stars because I'd like it, but 4 if you're feeling not that generous.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. We those do help us out, and we do read those. So
yeah, from according to our Spotify stats, more people listened to the podcast this year, so that's always good.
Yeah,
to see.
Yeah, we got a sort of Spotify wrap for creators, and it's interesting to see. I was surprised that our top episode was Mary Magdalene.
Yeah, I was surprised by that too. Was
I telling that to you guys or someone outside of the company? But whoever was like, that's not surprising because like kind of religious stuff might draw a lot of eyeballs or something. It's an interesting episode too. Yeah, and our most commented one was on, what's that guy's name? David Reiner. Yeah.
Was that this year episode or was that last year?
It must have been this year. Or maybe it was together. Like overall. I'm not sure.
Yeah. It all blurs together at a certain point, but whatever.
That's true. We've done a lot of episodes this year.
We did, and last year.
And last year, yeah.
And hey, if you're listening to it, thanks for listening. It means a lot. We really do appreciate it.
Yeah, and we'll be back. This is the last episode of 2024.
2024.
We'll be back in January with, the Satanic Panic, and that's an interesting one as well. It's another kind of strange, not conspiracy theory is not exactly the right word, but
it's a little bit of a, I think it falls into that same realm of conspiracy theory, kind of.
People seeing things in places, people seeing things that might not exist, maybe.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's an interesting time in American history, especially as somebody who plays Dungeons and Dragons weekly.
Yes. Yeah. There was one mother who wanted to shut that down.
Yeah, people are not fans of that. So there is still some of that sentiment today.
Oh, yeah.
About D&D. People are like, oh, isn't that devil worship? I'm like, not really. I mean,
wow, that's what I'm going to say the next time I meet someone who plays D&D. Isn't that devil worship? I know a lot of people who play it.
Yeah, it's a good game.
I've never played it before, but I'm going to play a game. My friend is really into board games, and I made a deal with him that he would come to trivia if I would play this game. And it sounds like a D&D type game.
So, what's it called?
Mothership?
I don't know. Can't attest.
I don't know either, but I'm going to find out.
Well, have fun.
Thank you.
And to everybody listening, happy holidays, happy new year. We will see you in 2025.
Yes. Happy New Year.